And so the story began within a forest where the trees stood bony and twisted like the fingers of an old woman. Pitch black mold and damp moss clung to the bark, while a strangely murky sky loomed overhead. It was a place teeming with bizarre monsters, creatures one would never encounter in reality, caught within the clutches of a terrifying beast whose grotesque face seemed intent on devouring him. The boy felt agonizing pain tearing through his body as he struggled desperately to prevent the creature from killing him. With a weary sigh of frustration, the child declared that he could endure this torment no longer. Brutally, the creature's jaws clamped shut, swallowing him whole. In the next moment, his blood spilled violently from his body. Suddenly, the boy jolted awake in his own bed, realizing it had all been a dream. Gasping desperately for breath, he reflected that 12 years had already passed since he had begun experiencing dreams so vivid and painful that they felt as though he were truly dying. Frustration welled within him as he once again cursed that dreadful dream. Outside, the day broke over the vast city as though nothing unusual had occurred. Sitting at his desk, he began carefully recording every grim detail of the nightmare in his notebook. Rising from his chair, he reflected that he could endure the pain of dying. Standing amid the disorder of his messy room, however, he admitted that something else was far more painful. Sleep itself. He realized that whenever he fell asleep in reality, he was dragged back into that nightmare world. Yet whenever he died within the nightmare, he was forced back into reality. There was no escape, no cycle that allowed him a proper night's rest. Clutching his chest as he lay in bed, he concluded that obtaining even a decent night's sleep was impossible. Determined to overcome his overwhelming exhaustion and to stop dying repeatedly in that hellish dream, he resolved that he needed to do something. During the 12 years of nightmares, he had learned many things: weaponry, martial arts, swordsmanship, jungle survival, and even military tactics. For 12 relentless years, he had trained and fought. Thanks to that effort, he had gradually begun dying less frequently in those nightmares. However, the fundamental problem remained unchanged: sleep itself. His doctor had suggested that he try to find something he genuinely wanted to do, reasoning that such a purpose might finally allow him to sleep peacefully. The boy considered those words carefully. Something he wanted to do. Standing within his messy room, he continued contemplating the thought. Ultimately, he admitted to himself that the only thing he truly wanted was simply to fall asleep. He wanted nothing more than to sleep soundly, even if it happened only once. Suddenly, blood began flowing from his nose. Seeing the blood, he could not comprehend what was happening to his body. Before he could fully process the situation, he lost consciousness and collapsed onto the floor surrounded by spreading blood. Yet in that fading moment, he noticed something strange. His body felt light. The terrible, persistent headache that had plagued him for years had vanished. It felt as though fresh, clean air were filling both his chest and his mind. For the first time in 12 years, he felt as though he had truly slept. Slowly opening his eyes, he saw a grim forest stretching before him. He wondered if he had actually died. If so, then this place must be. Looking around, he realized he was leaning against the twisted trunk of a massive tree. Shock flooded through him as he took in his surroundings. By the appearance of this place, he recognized it instantly. It was the nightmare world in which he had suffered for 12 long years. From the shadows, a giant monster approached. He concealed himself quickly as the creature passed by. Staring intently at the monster, memories of the moment before his transformation returned to him. Considering the amount of blood he had lost earlier, he concluded that he might truly be dead. If that were the case, then dying here would mean there was no longer any reality to which he could return. With a dark expression settling over his face, he acknowledged a chilling truth. From this moment onward, this place was his reality. Fortunately, he knew exactly what kind of world this was, and precisely what he needed to do in order to survive. Thinking carefully about the situation, he decided that fighting right now would be unwise. First, he needed to reach a brighter place, somewhere the monsters hated. As he prepared to move, his hand instinctively drew the sword resting at his side. Seeing his own action, he paused in confusion. A strange sensation surged through him. He realized that he did not want to run away. The movement caught the monster's attention, and the creature turned its gaze toward him. Staring warily at the beast, he wondered whether this strange confidence was because he had finally slept deeply for the first time in ages, or perhaps because this body was younger than his real one. The moment the monster noticed him, it charged forward with terrifying speed. The monstrous fanged beast roared, its jaws gaping wide, and its eyes blazing with feral rage. Grasping the sword firmly with both hands, the boy felt his entire body screaming at him to fight to survive. He rushed forward to meet the monster. His eyes glowed crimson. With a spectacular strike, his sword sliced cleanly through the creature, splitting its body in half. Blood erupted violently from the monster as its limbs were severed. The beast collapsed. Our hero landed calmly upon the ground, drenched in blood. He flicked the blade sharply, scattering the blood from its edge. Without hesitation, he drove the sword deep into the monster's corpse. Reaching into its entrails, he discovered a pure blue core shining brightly within. He pulled the core free and held it in his hands, staring at it intently. Without a moment's hesitation, he swallowed the core raw, his face still smeared with blood. After consuming it, a realization dawned upon him. Confidence filled his expression. In this dark fantasy world, he would survive no matter what. As he continued walking through the forest, he reminded himself of his first priority. He needed to find a brighter place. Just ahead, sunlight began illuminating the path before him. At the top of a towering tree, the hero stood asleep, balanced effortlessly upon a branch. A faint smile rested upon his lips as his eyes slowly opened, and he reflected inwardly that it had been yet another night of perfect rest. At that pace, he had been carving his way through the undergrowth and tangled forest for quite some time. Upon contemplating his circumstances, he realized that it had already been an entire month since he had crossed over into this unfamiliar place. He recalled how he had continued advancing from the suffocating pitch-black darkness toward the distant glimmer of light. Yet merely possessing the urge to fight did not mean that he would recklessly hunt monsters. From the corner of his eye, he cast a sharp glance toward a giant demonic bat, and reasoned that wagering his life purely for amusement would be utter madness. With a stony expression etched across his face, he inwardly admitted that he could not completely suppress the instinctive urge to fight. Nevertheless, a faint smile surfaced upon his lips as he reminded himself that he only hunted when he genuinely required food. At that precise moment, his stomach growled audibly with unmistakable hunger. Without the slightest hesitation, he surged forward. He plunged downward in a sweeping arc, his cloak billowing violently behind him as his blade cleaved through the giant demonic bat, scattering its dark form through the air like torn shadows. With a single decisive strike, the monster was cut down, and he extracted its core. Holding the core in his hand, he reflected that with this he had acquired a new power. He understood that the essence contained within the monster's bodies carried latent power. As he consumed the essence, he contemplated that ingesting it granted him a chance to obtain the abilities of the monster itself. Afterward, he seated himself and leaned back against a nearby tree. As he pondered quietly, he realized that ever since he had begun consuming those essences, adapting to this world had become considerably easier. There was also another fact he had discovered. Reaching into his pocket, he retrieved a mercenary badge and examined it carefully. While studying it, he concluded that this body appeared to belong to someone who had once held the rank of a third-class mercenary. Come to think of it, he realized that he could actually read the writing engraved upon the badge, and upon that badge, the words third-class mercenary were clearly inscribed. The mere existence of such a token implied one significant truth. People were living somewhere within this world. Facing the bright light that shimmered at the end of the forest, he realized that he was not alone in this world. Suddenly, something unusual captured his attention. A peculiar mental trap had been placed upon the ground. With a cautious expression, he studied the trap and realized that its presence suggested there might be people nearby. Without wasting another moment, he began running in the direction where the trap had been set and where the light seemed to originate. Eventually, he arrived at the edge of the forest. There, to his astonishment, he discovered a shelter. He could not conceal his disbelief when he saw that there was in fact a house standing there. Approaching the door cautiously, he knocked and asked whether anyone was inside. When no response came, he slowly stepped into the house. Inside, his gaze settled upon a book resting on a dusty table. He approached the table, picked up the book, and began reading its contents. As he examined the pages, he discovered that the book bore the title Demonic Realm Chronicles. He was surprised to realize that the history of this land and the various terms associated with it had been recorded with remarkable precision. His eyes widened as a sudden realization struck him. For him to survive in this world, that book was absolutely essential. At that moment, the silence of the room was abruptly broken by the sound of approaching footsteps. Before he could react, a giant crossbow was suddenly aimed directly at his face. A gray-haired old man demanded to know who he was. The hero slightly turned his head toward the man. The old man, clearly devoid of patience, warned him that he should answer clearly, or he would put a hole through his head. Observing the old man's reaction, the hero reflected that he was simply relieved to see another human being. At the same time, he wondered whether the old man had mistaken him for a robber. Facing the old man calmly, he explained that he meant no harm. He clarified that he had merely noticed a house standing in such a remote place and had entered out of curiosity. Upon hearing those words, the old man glared at him fiercely and ordered him to get lost, declaring that he had no business with him. Not wishing to push his luck, the hero agreed that he would leave. However, before departing, he raised the book in his hand and inquired whether the old man might possibly lend it to him, because he wished to read it. He added that he would be willing to pay a price if necessary. The old man stared at him sharply and asked what he would do if he refused. Upon hearing that, the hero reflected that he absolutely needed the book in order to survive in that world. In that case, his hand instinctively drifted toward the hilt of his sword. With a threatening tone and piercing eyes, he declared that if the request were refused, He might have no choice but to become a robber. The atmosphere within the room immediately grew tense. Staring seriously at the old man, he silently considered that he had no idea how strong the old man truly was, yet he did not feel as though he would lose. Unexpectedly, the old man lowered his weapon. He remarked that a robber would hardly talk about wanting to read a book. He then introduced himself as Hector. Seeing the tension ease, the hero also lowered his guard and introduced himself as Kim Woo-jin. Hector looked somewhat skeptical upon hearing the name and remarked that it sounded rather peculiar. Woo-jin responded that the old man could simply call him Jin. Privately, he reasoned that his real name was probably difficult for people in that world to pronounce. Holding the book fondly in his hands, Hector explained that although he understood the situation, the book was precious to him as well, and therefore he could not lend it out. However, he proposed a compromise. If Woo-jin wished to read the book, he could stay there for a while and read it inside the house. In return, Hector asked him to assist with a few simple chores. Woo-jin accepted the condition without any hesitation. As night descended, food simmered within a pot placed over the fire, releasing a rich and inviting aroma. Reflecting upon the situation, Woo-jin realized that he had unexpectedly ended up staying at Hector's house. Hector appeared somewhat gruff, yet he did not seem like a bad person. When they finally began eating, Woo-jin stared at the food with visible amazement. He reflected that it had been an incredibly long time since he had eaten warm soup. The moment he took a single bite, tears of joy welled up in his eyes, because the dish was so delicious. At that moment, he even wondered whether Hector might actually be an angel. Every day, Hector left the house at sunrise to go hunting. One morning, as Hector prepared to depart once again, Woo-jin asked whether he was heading out. Once more, Hector confirmed that he was, and added that the hunt might take longer than usual that day. Woo-jin later learned that Hector intended to take revenge upon the monster that had killed his comrades. Watching Hector walk toward the forest, Woo-jin reflected that Hector appeared quite strong, yet the visible tension in his demeanor suggested that the monster he intended to hunt must be considerably powerful. After Hector departed, Woo-jin spent his days reading the book whenever he found himself alone. The book's title was Chronicles, and it began with the story of the Northern Empire. The narrative explained that the king of the Northern Empire, blinded by greed, had laid his hands upon an otherworldly gate said to contain the truth of all creation and immense power. On that very day, the calamity began. Powerful monsters poured forth from the otherworldly gate and transformed the North into a demonic realm within merely 9 years. In response to the catastrophe, humanity united several factions and formed the Order Alliance. The Order Alliance constructed a massive barrier in order to prevent the demonic realm from spreading any further. After finishing that portion of the book, Woo-jin began reflecting deeply upon the information he had acquired. As expected, the book contained an abundance of useful knowledge. With a thoughtful expression, he continued reasoning through the implications. According to the records, the deeper one ventured into the demonic realm, the stronger the monsters became. Thinking about it carefully, he realized that the monsters had grown weaker as he moved toward the light. Outside the shelter, Hector suddenly appeared sprinting toward the house. At that moment, Woo-jin found himself wondering just how deep within the demonic realm he had originally been wandering. Meanwhile, the old man ran desperately while repeatedly glancing over his shoulder, his eyes tense and alert, as though something dangerous were chasing him. As Woo-jin continued contemplating his own strength within that place, the situation outside quickly became clear. Hector was being pursued by a pack of werewolves. At the front of the group ran their leader, whose eyes glowed with a sinister crimson light. With ferocious gazes, the monsters charged forward at terrifying speed. Hector suddenly came to a halt. Without hesitation, he turned around and fired a bolt from his crossbow in an attempt to slow the beasts. However, to his shock, the wolves deflected the arrow effortlessly with a simple swipe of a claw. The bolt shattered into splinters. Realizing the danger, Hector immediately turned and ran again. But to his astonishment, Woo-jin was already standing there, with a massive sword gripped firmly in his hand, and his crimson eyes faintly glowing. Woo-jin walked forward with a cold and intimidating presence. Seeing Woo-jin approaching, Hector shouted for him to run and warned him that the situation was extremely dangerous. Yet before Hector could say anything further, Woo-jin completely ignored the warning and rushed straight toward the monsters. As he charged forward, he leaped high into the air, preparing to strike the leader of the pack. The werewolf attempted to block the incoming attack with its claws, but in the very next moment, Woo-jin's strike descended with overwhelming force. The blade sliced cleanly through the monster from top to bottom, cutting the leader completely in half. As Woo-jin landed upon the ground, his eyes glowed crimson. Witnessing their leader fall instantly, the remaining monsters froze in shock and instinctively stepped back. The second in command of the pack glared at Woo-jin with murderous hostility. Hector meanwhile stood there in complete shock. With an expression of utter consternation, he stared at Woo-jin in disbelief. Wu Jin had taken down the werewolf with a single slash. Casually, he swung his blade behind him, wiping the blood from its edge. The monster's body lay upon the ground lifeless, clearly split in two. Then Wu Jin called out to the old man. Hector remained completely flabbergasted, with a sharp voice and a steady gaze fixed upon him. Wu Jin asked whether that monster was considered strong. Hector, his face darkened, asked whether he was seriously questioning if a werewolf was strong. Fixing Wu Jin with a sharp glare, he answered his own question, stating that it was incredibly strong. That confirmation alone was enough for Wu Jin. He merely shrugged, and casting a cold glance toward the remaining werewolf pack, told Hector that he would hear the details later, after he dealt with the rest. The monsters returned his stare with ferocious hostility. Observing them carefully, Wu Jin concluded that they did not appear particularly formidable. Still, there were roughly 40 of them, just enough to screw him over if he grew careless. Taking his stance, Wu Jin prepared himself to fight the monsters. Yet another thought crossed his mind. Instead of fighting them all, he decided he would slice the throat of the one who appeared to be second in command, and shatter their morale. Locking his gaze onto the creature, he identified his target. The monster possessed an exceptionally large build, and stood prominently at the very front. That was the one. A burst of dark, powerful aura erupted from Wu Jin as he raised his blade, preparing to kill the werewolf. The monster glared back at him. Wu Jin did not even flinch. Seeing this, the creature slowly lowered its gaze, before abruptly turning around. The remaining werewolves were stunned by their commander's reaction. Without hesitation, the large beast fled. Abandoning the group and leaving them in utter shock, the monster began barking desperately, its tail tucked between its legs. The entire pack immediately turned and fled at full speed. Hector watched the scene in astonishment as the monsters ran away. Those werewolves were known for their bravery. Wu Jin simply thought to himself that the giant monster clearly knew how to assess a situation. The werewolves disappeared into the forest. Later that night, after returning safely to their shelter, they tossed the giant werewolf corpse onto the table. Hector then informed Wu Jin that there was a bounty of at least 40 gold coins on the head of the werewolf he had killed. Wu Jin asked whether that was considered a large amount of money. The old man assured him that it certainly was, enough to live comfortably for 6 or 7 years without working. Wu Jin stared at the corpse of the werewolf in surprise. He thought it strange that such a high bounty had been placed on a weakling like that. More importantly, another realization dawned on him. If a trash monster like a werewolf carried such a massive bounty, then he simply needed to find and kill similar creatures whenever he ran short on cash. A faint smile spread across his face. Perhaps life in this world might actually be easier than the last 12 years he had endured. Without wasting time, Hector packed a backpack. Inside it he placed the werewolf hide, some jerky, a pouch of silver coins, and a pioneer map. He then instructed Wu Jin to take the werewolf corpse to Pioneer Village, the place marked on the map, and find a man named Jacob who would purchase the hide for a fair price. As a gesture of gratitude, the old man handed the entire treasure to him. Wu Jin looked surprised and asked whether it was really acceptable for him to give away something so valuable. Despite Wu Jin's reluctance, Hector insisted. He explained that Wu Jin had killed the werewolf, so he was simply paying the proper price. He also reminded him that he had held a personal grudge against that werewolf. Out of pure respect, the old man extended his hand and thanked Wu Jin for avenging him. He expressed hope that they might meet again if the opportunity arose. Their firm handshake sealed a bond of mutual gratitude. With the heavy bag resting on his back, Wu Jin thanked Hector for everything before setting off down the road. Along the dimly illuminated path, his solitary journey resumed. Amid the dense trees, Wu Jin walked steadily along the trail. Meanwhile, atop a hill, the werewolf that had fled earlier watched him with sharp eyes, standing guard against any potential threat. Eventually, Wu Jin reached the entrance of the village. From a distance, he observed the settlement and concluded that Pioneer Village appeared surprisingly well stocked for such a small town. Passing through the gates and stepping onto the dirt streets, Wu Jin noticed that everyone was staring at him with derisive expressions. He wondered if it was simply because he was a stranger they had never seen before. Everyone seemed tense and on high alert. Still, he reasoned that such caution was understandable in a world like this. After all, the thing more dangerous than monsters could very well be people. Ignoring the hostile reception, the young man pushed open the door to the local bar. Inside, the hall was filled with the chaotic noise of mercenaries and drunken patrons. Heading straight to the counter, Wu Jin ignored the commotion around him. Leaning against the table, he placed the items Hector had given him on the counter. Seeing him, the bartender asked whether he wanted a beer. Wu Jin calmly declined the drink, and instead asked whether the bartender knew where he could find a man named Jacob. Suddenly, a blade-scarred man sitting beside Wu Jin turned his head. The man casually sliced a piece of fruit with a knife and held it between his teeth as he prepared to eat it. He introduced himself as Jacob and asked what Wu Jin needed. Seeing him, Wu Jin thought to himself that this man had the unmistakable face of a scammer. Wu Jin explained that he had been sent by Hector and that he had been told he could sell a werewolf hide to Jacob. The moment Jacob heard the word werewolf, he jumped to his feet in shock. He loudly asked whether Hector had actually managed to kill a werewolf. As Jacob inspected the material, Wu Jin realized that the man assumed Hector had killed it. He decided there was no reason to correct him. Jacob examined the fur carefully and was stunned by the impeccable quality of the hide. Whispers quickly spread throughout the bar. Almost immediately, greed consumed Jacob's rotten mind. A sadistic smile spread across his face as his true criminal nature surfaced without disguise. Mockingly, he celebrated the idea that Hector had managed to pull it off. Meanwhile, the mercenaries in the bar quietly formed a circle and drew their knives. Without showing even a hint of fear, Wu Jin calmly asked what they were doing. Jacob sneered and told him that the situation should be obvious. He advised Wu Jin to leave while he was asking nicely, and promised to spare his life if he did. Wu Jin merely coughed to himself and reflected that scammer faces never lie. He reminded Jacob that Hector had sent him there in good faith, and asked whether Jacob had always conducted business with such intentions. With a sinister smile, Jacob warned him to watch his mouth. He claimed that he had simply made an investment, since Hector lived too far away. Supplying him had caused losses, and he needed the hide to recover what he had lost. Wu Jin's expression darkened. For a brief moment, he considered killing Jacob, but he restrained himself. He was angry, but killing a man over a mere hide did not seem justified. Still, he silently cursed the man as a pathetic bastard, and thought that Jacob should be grateful he was dealing with someone merciful. Without warning, the merchant suddenly threw a mug of beer straight into Wu Jin's face. The bar erupted in laughter at the humiliation. With a derisive expression, Jacob mocked him and told the kid not to act clever and to get lost. Without reacting at all, Wu Jin rose from his seat and calmly walked toward the exit. Satisfied with the theft, the bald man loudly mocked the boy's supposed cowardice. The wooden door slammed shut behind Wu Jin, sealing the room. Standing outside in the middle of the hall, Wu Jin slowly turned his head. With a predatory expression, he called out to Jacob in a threatening voice. He remarked that if someone intended to scam another person from the beginning, they should aim for the neck, not stab them in the back. Jacob was taken aback by the sudden shift in his demeanor. He angrily declared that he had been wrong about the boy being smart, and shouted that the kid clearly did not value his own life. He ordered his men to kill him, furious at the audacity. The thugs charged forward with their swords raised. One man shouted as he lunged forward to attack. Facing this group of scum, Wu Jin thought that killing people like them would not leave him with even the slightest guilt. With absurd speed, he dodged the incoming strike. The enemy blade sliced through empty air. The thug broke into a cold sweat, stunned by the speed and power of the movement. In the next instant, Wu Jin blitzed forward like a streak of lightning. Bodies collapsed behind him as blood sprayed across the room before anyone could react. Another man raised his axe and attempted to strike him. Wu Jin avoided the attack effortlessly and hurled a table straight into the thug's face. The impact was so violent that the crash echoed across the walls. Seeing the devastation, he cursed in desperation, realizing his end was near. Relentless, Wu Jin sliced the table in half and killed the man hiding behind it. His face was now drenched in blood. Seeing this, Jacob stumbled backward, trembling in terror as sweat poured down his face. He could not understand where such a monster had suddenly appeared from. Desperately searching for a logical explanation, he reasoned that a fighter this strong could not possibly exist in this region without him knowing about it. Realizing that he would die for nothing if things continued this way, Jacob panicked as Wu Jin slaughtered everyone in his path. Wu Jin's eyes glowed red as he fixed Jacob with a ferocious stare. Cold sweat dripped down Jacob's face as he finally decided to flee. In his panic, he shouted for his men to retreat. Chaos erupted as everyone rushed toward the exit. Suddenly, a tremendous crash echoed. The entire group was thrown violently onto the dirt ground outside. Jacob groaned as he tried to rise. Then his expression changed instantly into one of absolute terror. Standing before them was a gigantic red werewolf. The creature glared at them with a malevolent expression. Jacob screamed in disbelief, asking why such a monster had appeared inside the village. Now trapped between the monster and Wu Jin, the group had no possible escape. Wu Jin gazed at the beast calmly. The wolf began barking wildly while staring at the boy who had left the tavern. Observing this carefully, Wu Jin deduced that it was the scout wolf that had escaped earlier in the forest. With a dark tone and menacing expression, his glowing eyes fixed upon the creature as he asked whether it had come there because it wanted to die as well. Faced with Wu Jin's threatening gaze, the monster immediately became frightened. Without hesitation, the giant beast threw itself onto the ground. It whimpered like a tamed puppy. In a pathetic display, the monster rolled onto its back and even wagged its tail as if begging for affection. Jacob and his men watched the scene in complete shock. Even Wu Jin raised an eyebrow in confusion. He wondered what kind of mutt-like behavior this was and began to suspect something. Before finishing the thought, he stepped toward the mercenaries. With chilling coldness, he pointed at the bandits and ordered the beast to bite them. Like a loyal soldier receiving orders, the monster instantly straightened. Without hesitation, it leaped forward in a brutal pounce. Its massive jaws opened wide as it launched itself at the criminals. Screams echoed through the air as the thugs were torn apart and devoured. Bathed in the shadows of the bloody feast, Wu Jin watched the carnage unfold. A satisfied smile slowly appeared on his face. Observing the macabre spectacle, Wu Jin concluded that this partnership definitely had its advantages.